Um, so we'll get this running again, and I will just answer one question about dinosaurs. And the word dinosaur is a modern word which was mentioned by Charles Owen in 1841, and it means the horrible lizard. So it's part of the lizard family. So it's one of the reptiles. There are dinosaurs which are so big, and there are some which are very small. The dinosaur hatches from an egg which is just bigger than a football ball. So dinosaurs hatch from an egg, and they can be like a sheep, and then they grow up. Some are so big, like the T-Rex, others are small. Right, when we listen to the news, they say we discovered this dinosaur in millions of years. The Bible doesn't speak about millions of years of creation. It speaks about thousands of years. So when we hear they appeared in life 240 million years ago, and they disappeared 65 million years ago. That's Encyclopedia Britannica. But there was a researcher, Mary Schwartz, which is not a Christian, but she looked at T-Rex specimen, and when she cut through, she found red blood cells and elastic tissues. Elastic tissues don't last millions of years. They are only thousands of years. So she said, I repeated the experiment once and once more, and she's getting the same results. So her conclusion is not to change in the 65 million years when they disappeared. They said there must be a mechanism which allowed it to survive for millions of years. We haven't found this mechanism. So it is not there in the operational science. Okay? So I'll just show you an example here of how we can look at a fossil and give it its age, because that will help us in the discussion. But our topic will be Darwin evolution. So let me show you this video.
I grew up fascinated by dinosaurs, watching movies, collecting models, reading all about them. Dinosaurs were big, they were magnificent, they were awesome. I was taught that dinosaurs once ruled the world, but that millions of years ago, they disappeared from the earth. Everything I believed about the age of the earth, the cycles of life and death, the evolution of humankind began dinosaurs. And then I learned that the Bible presented a very different history. Kim here is my colleague, fellow paleontologist. We've been friends since college. Today we study the same fossils, we use the same techniques, but that doesn't mean we agree on what happened here. We do interpret our findings differently. You see, fossils don't come with tags on them, telling us how old they are, where they lived, what they ate, or even how they died. We have to figure that out from the clues that we find. We never have enough clues. So, our starting points usually lead us to different conclusions.
Here's how I see it. I think this dinosaur died over 100 million years ago. It dried out in the sun for a long time, and later I think the specimen was covered by river sediment, which was caused by a local flood. She's been lying here all this time till we dug her up.
Where Kim sees millions of years, I see evidence of a different history. I believe this animal died in a flood, but it wasn't a local flood. It was a massive flood that covered the earth, Noah's flood, when God judged the world. The carcass was buried suddenly, before it could be eaten or decomposed, buried in a layer of sediment that stretches across the entire continent. Since the flood, according to the Bible, was about 4,300 years ago, That's how old I believe this fossil to be. We come to different conclusions because of our different starting points. I start with the Bible, my colleague does not. We all have the same facts. We merely interpret the facts differently because of our different starting points.
You see how important the starting point is? We are examining the same fossil. And by the way, fossilizations happen very quickly. If a fish dies in the sea, it doesn't go down and get fossilized. It floats, and then it decays and it's eaten. When is going to be fossilized if there is enough material coming its way, enough salts and pressure and temperature? And these are the conditions of Noah's flood. Because you have to separate the specimen from the oxygen, otherwise it will be decay. So in Noah's flood, there was massive amount of material coming through the rain and through the fountains of the deep, which killed the animals in its way and fossilized them quickly. You can have another way to fossilize things in very cold weather, because the ice separates them from oxygen, which can cause decay. So as you can see here, it's the same specimen of the dinosaur. One is seeing it is dried in the sun for millions of years. He has no evidence of that. And if it dries, it actually decays. And he said there was a flood, a local flood from a river, covered this specimen and make it to be fossilized. That's an assumption. And he put dates on that. But if you start from the biblical starting point, you understand that there was a universal flood which can cause this fossilization. And you have actually in America a place called Morrison Formation, where 13 states. And in Morrison Formation, you find dinosaurs, you find marine animals, you find birds. They didn't live together. Some flying, some in the sea, some on the land. But they all buried together due to the flood. So how you interpret the facts depends on your starting point. Now I'll move, that's just to answer one question, but I'm looking forward to more. Let me just take you through quickly to what our subject is, which is Darwinian evolution. So evolution actually has 3 dimensions. Biological evolution, and that's what we see in Darwinian evolution. Geological evolution, and that's what we see in the mountains and in the fossils. And then cosmological evolution, which we talk about the Big Bang and the universe and the galaxies. We'll not cover all of that today, but this is just to give you the understanding of the word evolution. Evolution meaning coming from the simple to the complex. But if you use the word evolution as a change, yes, there are changes within all these categories. So this is just to give you a general plan. Let me tell you about Darwin, because he came from United Kingdom. He was born in 1809 in south of England, and his father sent him to study medicine in Edinburgh. I live in Glasgow, about 50 miles from Edinburgh. So when he went there, there was no development of anesthesia, so he saw very rough sort of operations, amputation and things like that. So he came back to his dad and said, no, I'm not going to continue. So the most prestigious study at the time was to study theology. So he went to Cambridge to study theology and studied the Bible, but he didn't believe it. And that's the difference between information in the mind and the work of God in our hearts. That's a big difference. After that, there was a big discovery ship going to South America called the Beagle. And he went with the captain of the Beagle as an observant. So he went there, and in a place called Galapagos, and there are different islands, he found a bird called the finch. And the finch he found that the beak is different from one island to another, depending on the type of food available. Some are very sharp, some are flat, depending on how they can pick this seeds to survive. So he came with the conclusion that we don't need a creator, we need natural selection. The area selects who is available to live in that area, and he called that the natural selection. So he came back from this journey, and he was armed by another chap called Charles Lyell, who was a lawyer, but he was very interested in geology. And he said we should examine geology with the same rate of change that we observe nowadays. We have to forget that Moses wrote about the universal flood. Get Moses out of geology completely, and there is no global flood, and the rate of change that we are observing now is the rate that happened in the past. That's a big assumption, because when tsunami happened in South Asia, some of the islands moved within hours because of catastrophic geology. So, as I explained to you in the previous session, that if you look at South America and Africa, you can put them together. The distance about 5,000 kilometers. We are moving 5 to 10 centimeters. So to separate them, it takes millions of years. We don't believe that. We believe in catastrophic geology, which make the separation, and then we are moving slowly. So we are not against science, but we are using science from a biblical perspective. And these are two types of geology. It is called catastrophic geology and uniformitarian. Uniformitarian meaning the same rate of event. But we live in catastrophic geology. Look how your starting point can change your understanding of things. I just give you two examples now with the dinosaurs and with the separation of the continents. Right, so Charles Lyell came back from his journey, and he was armed or believing in what Lyell said before. I'll move on that very quickly, and let us see this one.
When we look at geological features around the world, many of them are radically different from anything being formed today, like thick mud layers over continents, or coal seams covering entire states, or fossil graveyards, or frozen mammoths, or miles of underground cave passages, or thick ice sheets moving over continents, or craters of supervolcanoes, or canyons cut thousands of feet deep. It looks like the present is not the best way to explain the geological features of the past. The Bible, however, offers another way to explain features from the past. Noah's flood was a global judgment, a violent catastrophe upon the earth. Based on this truth revealed in God's Word, scientists are developing a series of models to explain how the flood and its aftermath could have shaped the world today. In the course of the flood, erosion washed away mountains of rock in some places, while miles of mud and sand were piled up in others. The Earth's crust was thickened in some places and thinned in others. Like jostled ice cubes sink and bob up to their proper level in the water, some sections of land sank after the flood, while other sections rose. Supervolcanoes and superquakes rocked the world after the flood. As the centuries passed, the catastrophes became rarer and smaller. Modern earthquakes and volcanoes are dim leftovers from this violent period of Earth history. Warm oceans after the flood produced violent weather, possibly even hypercanes, huge hurricanes like the Great Red Spot on Jupiter, which may have persisted for centuries. High rainfall after the flood filled enormous lakes, eroded large canyons, and carved cave systems. As animals left the ark, multiplied and spread over the earth, many of them were preserved as fossils. Some were buried in ash and mud. Some were preserved by unique chemical conditions, and others were frozen. Truly, the present is not the way things were in the past. Instead, the Bible is the key to help us understand geological features around the world.
the importance of this film really is to tell us the present is not the key to the past. What is written in God's word help us to understand the present. So this is a very important equation in our mind. Right, now let me just take you quickly to our dear friend Darwin. Darwin, when he came back from his journey, he wrote a book called Origin of Species, talking about the animals, how they are distributed in the world and how they came. And then after a few years, he called The Descent of Man, because he believes that we all came from common ancestor, and one branch become the apes, and the other branch is humans. That's what he believes. And he believes that over long, long periods of time. So the mechanism really is survival of the fittest. So death and life is the cycle that brought man at the top. That's completely different from the biblical creation. God did not use death as a mechanism of producing life, because death is an enemy which came after the fall of Adam and Eve in sin. So death was not there in the original creation of God. It is a punishment that entered into the creation as a result of disobedience. So some Christians try to say God used the evolution to create. That's not logical at all, because that means God used death to create life. And this is not the God of the Bible. And that means also that death came into the world before Adam and Eve sinned. But we know by the sin of one man, death entered into the world. So we cannot really mix the creation and the evolution. They cannot really go together. They are against each other all the time. But unfortunately, some Christians try to match what is taught in the schools, and they try to say God used the evolution. And if you say God used the evolution, that makes them as a creation. It's not. And as I said, God will not use a death as a mechanism of life at all. So that's a very important thing. So we are familiar with this picture of apes, and then a man at the end. This is called March of Progress, and it is an artistic design in 1965. It is not done by a scientist, it's done by an artist. And actually, people who understand evolution don't like this picture at all, because they believe we branched in a branch like a tree rather than a smooth line. And you can't come from walking on 4 to standing on 2. There are lots of mechanisms that change in the hip, change in the knee, change in the foot, change in the balancing system, in something called cerebellum, and the inner ear. There are massive changes to happen. And for a change to happen, you need a change of coding system, which is the DNA. And this change happens as a result of information, not happen by chance. So all of that is really not real. So let me come back to Darwin and his evolution theory. There are 2 pillars of the evolution. The first one is natural selection. The second one is random mutations. These are the 2 pillars of this theory. One is natural selection, and we'll understand the terminology in a minute. And the other one is random mutation. So we'll have a big lesson on genetics. Very simple, and it's very easy to understand, actually. This is called Mendelian. Much more complicated, but these are the principles, and they are absolutely true. So if we have a character like the fur of a dog, this is the character that we're going to study together. So we have half of the information from the mother and half of the information from the father, right? So if the fur is medium size, it is short and long, short and long. If you come short and short, it becomes short. Short and long, it's medium. Long and long, it becomes tall. Okay? That's all what we need to know about genetics. Okay? So we will make this marriage between the two dogs. The length of the fair is the medium, and this is the female. We put a bow there here, and this is the male, and they fall in love and they got married. So what will happen? We have half of the information from the mother, that is the red S, and the blue S coming from the father. So the product is short hair. There could be another combination, a short coming from the mother, a long coming from the father, and it will be medium hair. There is a third possibility that the long comes from the mother and long comes from the father, and they become long hair. So a family of the medium size hair can have 3 different offspring. They can have short, they can have medium, they can have long. We are all happy with that? Great. Let us take this family to a very, very cold place. Very, very cold place. So what will happen? The short hair cannot survive. The medium hair cannot survive. The only one who can survive is the long hair because it can deal with the cold. So what will happen? The short will die, the medium will die, the long will survive. That is the natural selection. So because of the short died, the medium died, we'll make their funeral. So we lost S and S, and we lost S and L, and all what we have is L and L. So the L and L, who are long fair, will marry long fair, and that's why we have animals with long fair in the very cold places. That's called natural selection. The area selects, but based in the genetic formation. So it didn't create anything, actually. In actual fact, we lost the S. Have you noted that? In this family of LL, we lost the S. We cannot have the S anymore unless we introduce a short dog to marry this LL, and we'll bring the S again. So natural selection is a way of distribution, but it didn't create anything. It's actually, we lost genetic information in natural selection. Right, we'll reinforce that with this. So L and L live in the very cold places, and that's why they can acclimatize to this. So we Christians who believe in the creation and believe the Bible, believe in natural selection, because we can do the natural selection in the laboratory. We can see the natural selection in nature. But natural selection is not a creative power. Natural selection is a distributing power. But it is not creating anything. In actual fact, we lost genetic information. Let us do the same experiment just to reinforce what we are saying. If we take this family SS, SL, LL to a very hot climate, what will happen? The LL with the long fair, he will not tolerate heat. The SL in this heat cannot survive. Who can survive? The one with SS, the short hair, who can tolerate the heat. So the first two will die, the LL and SL. We'll make their funeral, so we lose LL and SL. And what is remaining here is SS. And that is the natural selection. Did it create anything? No. We actual fact lost some information, genetic information, and in order to introduce it again, we need to get LL or SS again in the equation. Are we all happy about this? It's very simple. Obviously, genetics are much, much more complicated than this. But this is called Mendelian law, and it is agreed by all scientists, atheists and Christians. They agree about Mendelian law. So this is the basics, but obviously genetics is much more complication. There is something called permeation. There is lots of other things really that goes with that. So we have SS in the hot climate. So this is the distribution of the natural selection. So these finches that Darwin discovered or studied in the Galapagos Islands, they are all finches. None of them become a dove. They are finches. They are the same group with different genetic combinations. That's why the peak is different from one group to the other. But they are all finches. And when we see the creation model, God created according to its kind. So God created the head of the family with the genetic information to differentiate into different species later on, but within the kind. Let me give you an example. If we have 300 types of dogs, we have so many, and we can do some in the laboratory actually by hybridization. But God created the wolf with the genetic pool to differentiate into all these types of dogs. So he created the head of the family, and that word according to its kind repeated 10 times in chapter 1 in Genesis. And that's very important to understand the creation model, because unfortunately we don't study these chapters very well. We depend on what we learned in Sunday schools, and we don't really examine what the Bible says about creation. It's according to its kind. So the dogs, there are different types of dogs. None of them will become cats, because the cat is in a different family. And you know that the lion and the cat are the same family. So according to its kind is an essential word to understand. So these are the different types of dogs till we come to the poodle or the chihuahua that you can put in your handbag. But they are all dogs. None of them is cat. And that's very important to understand. As you can see, there is loss of genetic information all the way down. In order to have evolution, you need added information to change. So the natural selection really works against evolution. It doesn't go with evolution. Obviously, in the school, you won't be taught that way. You will be taught completely different of what I'm saying. And by the way, in the exam, please write the textbook says, or the evolution is said, and write what they say, so you can get marks and progress. But in your own mind, you have to have a critical mind to understand what is true and what is not true. Examine everything and hold into the truth. This is really important principle. In your examination, you have to write what is in the textbook. And please do that with clear conscience. But at the same time, you have to have the ability to think and to choose. Right, we'll pass on this very quickly. Now, natural selection is a fact. So we Christians who believe in the Bible and believe in creation model, we believe in natural selection. But natural selection is not evolution. They try to teach us that natural selection, evolution. And they get very old examples, like the horse. They can have 2 or they can have 3 in their foot. Digits in their feet. And they say this is evolution. But they are horse. They didn't become something else. This is the same changing within the kind. And if we understand that, we'll understand creation model even better. Natural selection is conservative, not a creative process. It didn't create anything. We actually lost some information. Natural selection can explain the survival of the fittest. Why the dogs with the long hair managed to live in a very cold climate. And why the dogs with a short hair lived in a hot climate. It can explain the survival of the fittest. It is not the environment which creates. They are accommodating to the environment because of the genetic makeup, but not the arrival of the fittest, which is the real problem. Let us meet a very famous person, Richard Dawkins, who is professor in Oxford. He is retired now, and he travels the world to say there is no God, and he wrote many books against God, And a few years ago, in the buses in London, the red ones, the double-deckers ones, he put an advert, probably God doesn't exist, enjoy your life. If God doesn't exist, I'll be terrified to live. But he's a big atheist. But let us see what he said about natural selection, because that's one of the pillars of evolution. He said natural selection is blind watchmaker. Imagine a watchmaker and blind. He said it is blind because it does not see ahead. So natural selection doesn't plan for the future. It does not plan for consequences. If there is a change, that can destroy all the development that happened in the past. So it doesn't plan for the consequences. Has no purpose in view. They don't know the end product. Can you imagine your body is formed that way? No chance. Your eye, your brain, your muscles, your joints, I can spend hours telling you about this. That cannot happen by natural selection. Then look at his conclusion. It's very sad, really. Yet the living results of natural selection overwhelmingly impress us with the illusion of design and planning. Can you imagine? Illusion of design and planning. As if your body, which is very complex, can happen by chance and time and laws of nature, as we said, and millions of years and mistakes. And by natural selection, you give us the impression you are designed, but you are not really designed. That's very sad. Because he described the natural selection as blind, as not able to deal with the consequences, have no purpose in view. When I was traveling from Heathrow in London coming to Toronto, I just looked at the airport. It's a very complicated structure. I said, if the engineers decided to build that by chance, that will be catastrophe. Because the runway could be the storage for the luggage. And the train that takes you from one place to another could be the office for the ticket officing. It will be catastrophic. And with great respect to all these airports here in Toronto or in Heathrow, they are nothing compared to the complexity of you and me now. So we cannot come by chance and time and laws of nature. That's what Richard Dawkins said. The term natural selection is very misleading because unlike artificial selection done by intelligent, purposeful, and humans, nature is not an intelligent, purposeful agent. What it means here is natural selection, when it's applied to nature, we think there is no mind behind it. But when we have artificial selection in the lab, there is lots of engineering and lots of thinking to develop this artificial selection in the lab. So in natural selection, as you can see, we are coming down these stairs, down from the wolf to the chihuahua. In evolution, you need to come from the simple to the complex. So natural selection actually works against evolution. But in the school, you will not be taught that way. And you have to be very careful and able to think for yourself. There is a book written by a person, is Werner Gitt. He's a lovely man, and he was a professor of information theory in Germany. And he said there is no known law of nature, no known process, and no known sequence of events which can cause information to originate by itself from matter. So information doesn't come from matter. Information comes from intelligence. And you cannot weigh information. If you have a CD-ROM with empty and another CD-ROM with Encyclopedia Britannica, which is a massive document, if you weigh them, they weigh the same way. But one is full of information and one is no information. So information is not material. Information comes from intelligence. Right, we'll just pass this. Let me just show you this. This is the evolution that we think is wrong. From a little amoeba at the bottom, to a fish, to amphibian, to reptiles, to birds. take me from amoeba to a fish, because you need to add information on the DNA to produce eye, to produce lungs, to produce spine, to produce digestive system. From where this information comes? It doesn't come from matter. So this evolution, what we call vertical evolution, is impossible, really impossible. Now we talk about the creation model. The creation model according to its kind, according to its kind. So there are fish and there are different types of fish, but they are all fish. None of them became something else. There are reptiles, there are amphibians, there are birds, there are animals, there are humans. And they are all distinct kinds and according to its kind. I think that's very important to understand. Quickly, we'll talk about mutation. Because mutation in Arabic called tafra, and tafra meaning as if we are taking a step forward. But actually mutation is a copying mistake. So mutation is taking a step backward. If we understand this, we have achieved a lot actually. Mutation is taking a step backward because it's a copying mistake. Imagine if you are making a photocopy of a document and the copy will be worse than the original. It cannot be better than the original. So that is the mutation, copying mistakes. Okay? So do mutations supply the new information necessary?
Can you give an example of a genetic mutation or an evolutionary process which can be seen to increase the information in the genome?
This is the answer. Do you like it? So Professor Dawkins, who is really professor of biology and he understands all of these mechanisms, he was asked by a creationist, can you give one example of a process that added information, mutation that added information and developed from simple to complex? And you see his response. He didn't have an answer. He paused, really, because there is no answer. So that really just makes us more confident of the creation model mentioned in the Bible. Right, we can cause mutation by irradiation, by chemical things like the chemotherapy and things like that. We can irradiate and produce from this insect, we can make long wings, we can make short wings, we can make no wings, we can make the wings to go backward. All of these changes we can do in the laboratory, and that's mutation, but the end result is this new insect is weaker than the original. So, lots of people talk about beneficial mutations, and I will just mention that very quickly. Some mutations are beneficial, but they never add information on the gene. They decrease the information or change the information. The very famous example is if you give antibiotics for a long time, the organism can become mutant and resistant. And there is a bug that can live in the stomach called Helicobacter pylori that can cause an ulcer. And we treat that by giving antibiotics and giving something to suppress the acid in the stomach. After some time, they will be resistant to Helicobacter pylori. So people say, okay, this organism was able to change its characters and survive. So mutation can be beneficial. The answer to that is when the antibiotics comes to the stomach, it combines with an enzyme in the wall of the bacteria and goes inside and destroy this bacteria. Some bacteria lose the ability to combine with the antibiotics. That's why they become resistant. So actually the resistance is a result of losing information in the genes. That's why they become resistant. Of course, become resistant, so this is beneficial for the organism, it's not beneficial for me. But the thing is, it is it is not an added information that made her different. And the conclusion of this, it's still Helicobacter pylori. It didn't become TB. It didn't become other organism. It didn't become Staphylococcus or other sort of organism. It's still Helicobacter, but resistant. Okay? So if anybody say you can see the mutation as a beneficial thing in front of your eyes, I remember actually in Scotland, the atheist attacked me a lot about creation and said, how can he be a doctor and see the mutant or resistant bacteria in the hospital and doesn't believe in creation? I need to explain to these people, this is not evolution. It's change within the group, within the character of the Helicobacter. It is not changing from one bacteria to another bacteria. And what happened with COVID actually is another thing. There were mutation all the time. But they still, within the coronary group of viruses, they didn't become influenza virus. It's still COVID virus within changes within the character. I hope that's not difficult, but it's really important to understand these things quickly. Right, why there are mutations? In the original creation, it was perfect. There was no illness, there was no death. I always say in the Garden of Eden, there is no need to build a hospital because there is no need for anybody to be ill and get treated. So originally, there is no mutation. After Adam and Eve disobeyed God, sin entered into the world. And with sin comes these diseases and illnesses and mutations. And we are awaiting a new heaven and a new earth where there be no illness anymore. So this is back again to the 7 C's, creation and the last one, consummation, the second coming, and the perfect world again. So man's action, disobeying God, sin entered into the world, and that's why we have illness and disease. So God created a perfect world, sin entered into the world, and now we live in the fallen world. So that will lead me now, I'll stop my presentation and answer one of the other questions that came to me when we're having coffee. Why do we have illness in the world? Why Christians suffer from disease and illness like anybody else? The answer is because we are living in a fallen world. There was a perfect world which we don't understand anymore because we are born into the fallen world already because we are born after Adam and Eve disobeyed God. So we, as a Christian, you can have a heart attack, you can have cancer, you can have influenza, you can have any sort of illness and disease because we are in the fallen world. But the fallen world is not our final destination. Our final destination is the new heaven and the new earth. There will be no illness and no disease and no problem at all. So the question of suffering and pain is really one of the most difficult questions. And by the way, I'm not belittling the illness or disease. I have suffered myself major problems in my health. But at the same time, I'm saying this is natural. When I faced this difficulty in my body, I didn't complain to God, why me? Because I am part of the human race, which is a fallen race in a fallen world. But God has a plan in the life of each one of us, and He will fulfill this plan in His own way. I know this is a difficult answer, and it's a difficult topic really to discuss. And as I said, I'm not belittling the pain or the illness or the separation or any of that, because I experienced that myself. But at the same time, the explanation of that, we live in a fallen world. That's why, remember, in the first lecture I said, don't use the argument of the beauty of nature to prove God. Yes, there is beauty in nature, but there is ugliness in nature as well. There is illness and disease and struggle. And there was one question why there are earthquakes and why there are floodings and things like that. Because we are living in the fallen world, but there will be a time when there will be a new heaven and a new earth. That is finished for this session. Any questions you'd like to ask? Right. Okay, I will repeat the question so everybody understands. The question about dinosaurs and the question why God did not allow Noah to take dinosaurs in the ark, and the other complementary of that, can dinosaur fit in the ark anyway? We'll come to that. Right. We believe that dinosaurs went into the ark. You will be surprised about that, but I'll give you the evidence before I continue to tell you how it happened. In the book of Job, it explains something called behemoth in chapter 14 from verse 15. And go and read it. It explains a big animal, and this big animal is very strong, and his tail is like the cedar of Lebanon, the big tree of cedar. And unfortunately, in the Bible, in the commentary Bibles, if you look at the reference, they say it's probably the elephant or the what's called another animal no, it's the Faras al-Nahr, hippo. Yes, hippo. Thank you. So in the commentary, you find that that's completely wrong. The commentary is not really inspired. What inspired is the text. So if you look at the tail of the elephant, it's like this. The tail of the hippo is even smaller, right? But the description of this animal in Job, and that's one of the early writings of the Old Testament, it speaks about an animal who is very strong, his bones like a brass, his strength in his tummy, and his tail is like the cedar of Lebanon. This is a typical description of Archosaurus, one type of the dinosaurs. Then you come to a bigger question. Did man live with dinosaurs? Have we seen dinosaurs? Right. There are some art in Cambodia, in one of the temples there, of dinosaurs carved on the temple. So how can they write something which they never saw? And actually in Wales, part of the United Kingdom, the flag is a dinosaur. So man lived with dinosaur is a big issue, and we have evidence of that. And even in the Egyptian history, I saw a vase with two dinosaurs locked together. And I got all of that on my computer, really, I can show you later. So we have evidence of man lived with dinosaurs. We have description of dinosaurs after the flood. That means some of them entered the flood. Others were outside and died, and we get them in the fossils. The other question, how can a dinosaur enter an ark? We need to understand the size of the ark. The size of the ark, 300 cubit by 50 by 30. The cubit is about half a meter roughly. So it gives you about 150 meters. It's more than a football pitch, 1.5 in length, and the side. And it is 3-story high. And they built a replica in Williamson Town in America, and I visited several times. And actually, I recorded that in a program called 1-to-1, and I can give you the link to all of that so you can see the details of all what I'm saying. So big. As I said, the dinosaur hatches from an egg which is the size of a football ball, bigger than the size of a football ball. So the small dinosaurs will be the small size one. And I think God will guide the small ones to be able to repopulate the earth after that. They were extinct. We don't know how they were extinct. Some people think there was a meteorite which hit Mexico, and there is a big hole there. But actually, the main dinosaurs fossils are in America and in other places. So why it happened in Mexico and they died in the place else? And as I said, in the Morrison Formation in America, you find that dinosaurs with some birds and with marine animals buried together. So what we see in the geological record is a history of death, not the history of life. And that was caused by the Noah's flood. Great question. I know that can change our attitude and understanding of lots of things. And that's the aim of this day together, really. When we have the biblical understanding, we have a different view of everything. Thank you for this wonderful question. Any others? Yes. Do we have a mic? Can go to my brother there. Yeah. In here, at the back.
So what about carbon 14? How do you explain the carbon 14 radioactive?
Yes.
It's half-life around 5,700 years.
That's wonderful. Yes. Carbon 14 really is our dear friends for creation. I'll explain that in a minute. Let me just explain about the radioactive material so we understand. There are atoms which are stable, carbon 12, but carbon 14, there are two neutrons which will be active, unstable, and they transform to nitrogen 14. And if you have a kilogram, it's not a kilogram, it's not measured that way, yeah? But if you have a kilogram of carbon 14, after half-life, it becomes half a kilo, and the half-life, as our brother said, 5,000, sorry. Yes, that's right. 5,725, I think. Yeah, okay. So how can we think of the carbon 14 calculating the age of material that we find around us? First of all, this carbon material was used in the early 20th century, but they have the geological column with millions of years before that. So it was not based on the carbon 14 or any other radioactive material. That's number one. Number two, if the half-life is short like this is called short half-life because there is half-life with millions of years. We don't expect to find any carbon 14 in the diamond. Diamond is carbon. And they believe that the natural diamond is formed 350 million years ago. So we should not find any traces of carbon 14 at all, because diamond is a very strong material, so it doesn't allow for contamination. Nothing coming from outside and contaminate the specimen. So they took samples of diamond and sent it to ordinary laboratories, and they found traces of carbon 14. So that means it is not 350 million years as they assumed. So carbon 14 is important, and it measures thousands of years, not millions of years. And it is important for documents like the Dead Sea Scrolls and things like that, because they used carbon in writing. And you can measure it, and it is within the thousands of years, not the millions of years. You might say it can reach to up 100,000. There are calculations and there are great details of this, which I can show you, which shows that it is thousands of years, not millions of years. Yeah.
When God created the earth and heaven,
Yeah.
is there was any before this there was creation?
No. That's a wonderful question, and I'll explain it again. Was there a creation before the creation is mentioned in chapter 1? Some people came with something called gap theory, which is, in the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. And the earth was void and empty, and the Spirit of God was moving around the earth. Yeah. First of all, we look at the language. The word "and" does not mean "then it became." The word "and" described the earth in the first creation, which has no shape and no life in it. And that's in day 1. Wait till day 5 when life will appear, when God will create marine animals and birds. There is a sort of life in day 3 when God created the plants, but the plants are different life than animal life, because they don't have nafas. And that means the plants are a package of energy for us to use. So when you harvest an apple, you are not killing an apple. It is there for you to use. But when you kill animal, that's a killing, because there is a breathing of life in him. So the first description of the earth without shape, because it was covered with water. And in day 3, God asked the earth to appear, and the water became the oceans. That's the meaning of void and empty, but it is not meaning a destroyed. The word in Arabic, khariba wa khawiya, meaning they thought it is the kharaba, destroyed. It is not destroyed, because there was no creation at all to destroy. So the gap theory appeared in 1812 to accommodate the idea of millions of years in the Bible. But it doesn't fit neither science, nor the language, nor the Bible. So there was no creation before the creation that's mentioned here. And lastly, I'll just mention one thing. In Exodus 20, verse 15, when God gave the commandments, he came to the command number 4, and say, you keep the Sabbath holy, because in 6 days God created heaven and earth and what is all in them. So there is confirmation of that later on. Yes. Yeah, the mic coming.
The falling of Satan
Yes.
was after the creation?
Yes. Yes. The Bible did not, the question is the falling of Satan after the full creation of the week of creation? Yes, we believe that. The Bible doesn't state that clearly, but there is one verse which can help us to understand this. After day 6, God saw all what he has done, and it was very good. So God not going to describe a very good world with a fallen Satan in it. So we believe that the fall of Satan happened after day 7, after the rest of the week, and then happened the period between the 7th day and Adam and Eve disobeying God. That's what we believe, yeah. Yes.
The spirit world were created after or during the creation, or because in Job they were singing when the creation was formed.
That's right, for Joy 38, absolutely. Yeah, the Bible doesn't give us detailed creation of the angels. So when the Bible is silent, I must be silent, because otherwise we'll come to wrong conclusions. But from Job 38, we can come to the conclusion that when Adam was created and the creation was complete, at that time the angels were created at a period before that, I don't know when, because they sang when God presented the creation. That's absolutely right. But at the same time, I can't give you a date where they were created, because the Bible didn't explain that to us. Great question. Any others? Yeah, the mic is coming to you, but I repeat your question so everybody will follow, yeah.
We know that the greater light and the lesser light were created on the 4th day.
Yes.
How was the first, second, third days calculated?
Absolutely, wonderful question. Do you know that question I hear all over the world, which is great. That's a universal question. Let me repeat the question again. In the first day, God created light. And there was evening and morning, second and third day, till we come to the 4th day when he created the sun, moon, and stars, and the light started to be from the sun. Let me differentiate between two things, the light and the source of light. The light is photons and waves, particles and wave. It's an energy. The source of light here in the church is this bulb here. It's electricity. It is not the sun. Okay? The sun is hydrogen and helium, and when they react together, they produce the light. So, in day 1, God created the photons and waves, the light, okay, as an entity. And the earth rotates, and there was darkness all over the earth, as we know from verse 2. Yeah? But he said, there will be light. So there was a source of light. We don't know what it is, but there was a light. And the earth rotates around itself to make 24 hours. The rotation of the earth around itself is not dependent on the sun. It rotates. That's how it's created. So part of the earth was in darkness and were part with light. And with the complete movement of the earth, the one in the darkness becomes in the light, and the one in the light becomes in the darkness. That's why there was evening and morning first day without the sun. Second day, God separated water from water and created the space. And again the earth rotated around itself and formed a day. There was evening and morning. And you notice it starts by evening. And you know that the Jewish day starts by the evening. For the Sabbath, they start by the evening of Friday till the evening of Saturday. So it's evening starting the day. So evening and morning, the second day. The third day, the same idea. There was a source of light. Let us come to the fourth day. In the fourth day, God created the sun and moon and said it will be to control days and years and months. Now the source of light will be the sun. And it can create now the month and the year. Because in day 1 and 2 and 3, you cannot create a month at all. Because the month is the rotation of the moon around the earth. The year is the rotation of the earth around the sun. So you cannot have years before having the sun. So that's day 4. And from day 4 onwards, it is the sun is the source of light. No, we don't. We don't. Some people it's God himself, but I don't believe that because God ordered the light to come. Because they depend on the Revelation 21 when they say the new city have no light. The Lord will be our light. But I don't think that's a verse that can explain something in Genesis.
God.
Exactly. It is a created entity, so it is not God. Because as I said, light is photons, that's particles and waves. That's absolutely right. Okay, I like these difficult questions anymore because time is pressing on. But please write your questions if you are shy to ask. I'm sure you are not shy, but just write your questions and we have another session after lunch. And I love really to hear more questions of you so you can explain things, we can explain things clearly.